Thank you for joining me for my second video of I Try to Tell You. These are news articles I'm going to go through that I collected starting in the late 1990s, and these are relevant to what we're facing today. I'm going to go over these as quickly as possible. This article is from July 1st, 2003. Flu could be the next terror weapon, warn scientists. Forget anthrax and smallpox. Influenza could easily be turned into the next weapon of mass destruction, scientists said today. They sounded the warning as researchers come close to completing the blueprint for the virus of the 1918 flu epidemic that killed up to 40 million people globally. Taken together with the fact that influenza virus is readily accessible and may be causing more deaths than previously suspected, the possibility for genetic engineering and aerosol transmission suggests an enormous potential for bioterrorism, the University of Texas scientist said. Writing in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, the team led by Dr. Mohammed Majid noted that this last century a series of flu epidemics from Spain to Russia and Hong Kong had killed millions of people as the virus naturally mutated. They pointed out that sequencing of the genome of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic was nearly complete, opening the door to unscrupulous scientists to build an even more potent virus. Recently, the possibility of synthesizing an infectious agent solely by following instructions from a written sequence has moved from theory to practice, they wrote. The scientists also noted that while infection generally took place through personal contact, the disease was easily transmissible through tiny droplets in the air and would-be bioterrorists needed only to spray an aerosol containing the weaponized virus inside a passenger plane to set off a global infection. They pointed out that in contrast to agents such as smallpox, which are carefully guarded, the flu virus was relatively freely available. It had the added advantage that because it occurred naturally, the beginning of a purposely started outbreak would not set off alarm bells, giving the disease a major head start on the people trying to fight it. Noting that its appeal to bioterrorists also lay in fact that it had a short incubation period and did not succumb to post-exposure immunization, the scientists set out a list of demands for urgent action. There would be more immunization, they said. Laboratory security should be raised. Antiviral drugs should be stockpiled. There should be closer monitoring of outbreaks, and governments should consider fitting filters and sensors to buildings. And that was from Reuters. Pfizer suit adds to pressure on industry. This article is from September 2nd, 2001. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll read what I can. The relationship between the world's largest pharmaceutical companies and the developing world has been dragged back under the spotlight by a class action challenging Pfizer over the way it conducted clinical trials in Nigeria 5 years ago. The lawsuit, filed on behalf of 30 Nigerian families, alleges Pfizer violated their human rights when it set up a clinic to give Trovan, an experimental antibiotic, to 200 children during a meningitis epidemic that swept the north of the country in 1996. Lawsuits have already been filed in Nigeria, but last week, in a sign the company may face far greater damages, the first suit was filed in the U.S. The families say Pfizer did not obtain informed consent before administering the treatment. This test was conducted in violation of international laws and treaties. the lawsuit says, including the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which was enacted in part to prevent the horrors of medical experimentation performed during the Holocaust from ever happening again. And it seems like it's being violated again today. Pfizer denies the allegations and issued a statement saying it was proud of the way it conducted its study during the crisis. In 1996, organizing clinical trials in Kano, Nigeria was far from easy. The country was under military rule and virtually cut off from the West following the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa. In the north, the country's health service was unable to cope with a disease that was killing thousands, especially children, who are particularly vulnerable to the brain disease. Pfizer claimed that the study was well conceived, well executed, and saved lives. However, the company's defense has been undermined by its admission that some of the trial records were falsified by staff in Nigeria. The affair is embarrassing for the world's largest pharmaceutical company, as the industry is attempting to recover from months of bad publicity over prices and access to its medicines. In a high-profile climb down this year, several companies withdrew a legal challenge to South African initiative to increase access to AIDS medicines, which threatened the company's patents. And last week, Roche was forced to deepen its price-cutting program in Brazil after the government threatened to make the company's AIDS drugs itself. Pfizer, which makes one AIDS drug and a wide range of important antibiotics, has been singled out by Oxfam, the UK aid charity, as the ringleader in the industry's fight to defend the patents that underpin its prices in the developing world. But the Trovan lawsuit highlights actions that are more sinister, the AIDS group says. In the developing world, some non-governmental organizations allege companies are conducting substandard clinical trials on potentially dangerous drugs away from scrutiny of powerful regulators such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Pfizer heralded Trovan as a medicine capable of killing bugs that had grown resistant to antibiotics, but its promise was overshadowed by safety issues and it was never approved by the U.S. regulators for use on children, much like what's happening today. The lawsuit says that Pfizer did not explain to the children or their parents that the proposed treatment was experimental and that they were free to refuse it and instead choose the safe, effective treatment for bacterial meningitis by being offered at the same site, free of charge, by charitable medical group. Pfizer says Trovan study was conducted by approval of the Nigerian federal and state governments and with consent from the families of treated patients. Some 11 children out of 200 died. A proportion the company says was lower than published results for other forms of treatment of this epidemic. Remember the time those scientists died? We're going to talk about that right now. From the Globe and Mail, scientists' deaths are under microscope. Saturday, May 4th, 2002. It's a tale of only the best conspiracy theorists could dream up. 11 microbiologists mysteriously dead over the span of just 5 months. Some of them world leaders in developing weapons-grade biological plagues. Others the best in figuring out how to stop millions from dying because of biological weapons. Still other experts in the theory of bioterrorism. Throw in a few Russian defectors, a few nervy U.S. biotech companies, and a deranged assassin or two, and a bit of Elvis, a couple of Satanists, and a subtle hint of espionage, a big whack of imagination, and the plot is complete, if a bit reminiscent of James Bond. The first 3 died in the space of just over a week in November. Benito Quay, Q-U-E, 52, was an expert in infectious diseases and cellular biology at the Miami Medical School. Police originally suspected that he had been beaten on November 12th in a carjacking in the medical school's parking lot. Strangely enough, though his body showed no signs of a beating, doctors then began to suspect a stroke. Just 4 days after Dr. Q fell unconscious came the mysterious disappearance of Don Wiley. Don Wiley, 57, one of the foremost microbiologists in the United States. Dr. Wiley of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute at Harvard University was an expert on how the immune system responds to viral attacks such as the classic doomsday plagues of HIV, Ebola, and influenza. He had just bought tickets to take his son to Graceland the following day. Police found his rental car on a bridge outside Memphis, Tennessee. His body was later found in the Mississippi River. Forensic experts said he may have had a dizzy spell and fallen off the bridge. Just 5 days after that, the world-class microbiologist and high-profile Russian defector Vladimir Pasechnik, 64, fell dead. The pathologist who did the autopsy, who also happened to be associated with Britain's spy agency, concluded he died of a stroke. Dr. Pasechnik, who defected to the United Kingdom in 1989, played a huge role in Russian biowarfare and helped to figure out how to modify cruise missiles to deliver the agents of mass biological destruction. The next two deaths came 4 days apart in December. Robert Schwartz, 57, was stabbed and slashed with what police believe was a sword in his farmhouse in Leesburg, Virginia. His daughter, who identifies herself as a pagan high priestess, and several of her fellow pagans have been charged. Dr. Schwartz was an expert in DNA sequencing and pathogenic microorganisms who worked at the Center for Innovative Technology in Herndon, Virginia. 4 days later, Nguyen Van Set, 44, died at work in Geelong, Australia in a laboratory accident. He entered an airlock storage lab and died from exposure to nitrogen. Other scientists at the Animal Disease Facility of the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization had just come to the fame for discovering a virulent strain of mousepox which could be modified to affect smallpox. Then in February, the Russian microbiologist Viktor Korshunov, 56, an expert in intestinal bacteria of children found around the world, was bashed over the head near his home in Moscow. 5 days later, the British microbiologist Ian Langford, 40, was found dead in his home near Norwich, England, naked from the waist down and wedged under a chair. He was an expert in environmental risk and disease. 2 weeks later, 2 prominent microbiologists died in San Francisco. Tanya Halsmeyer, 46, a Russian who moved to the U.S. in 1989, focused on the part of the human molecular structure that could be affected best by medicine. She was killed by fellow microbiologist Guang Matthew Huang, 38, who shot her 7 times when she opened the door to a pizza delivery. Then he shot himself. And the final 2 deaths came 1 day after the other in March. David Wynne Williams, 55, a respected astrobiologist with the British Antarctic Survey, who studied the habits of microbes that survive in outer space, died in a freak road accident near his home in Cambridge, England. He was hit by a car while he was jogging. The following day, Stephen Mostow, 63, known as Dr. Flu for his expertise in treating influenza and a noted expert in bioterrorism, died when the airplane he was piloting crashed near Denver. So what does any of this mean? Statistically, what are the chances? Wondered a prominent North American microbiologist who was reached last night at an international meeting of infectious disease specialists in Chicago. Janet Shoemaker, Director of Public and Scientific Affairs of the American Society Microbiology in Washington, D.C. pointed out yesterday that there are about 20,000 academic researchers in microbiology in the U.S. Still, not all of these are of the elevated caliber of those recently deceased. She had a chilling final thought. When microbiologists die in a lab, there's a way of taking note of the deaths and adding them up. When they die in freakish accidents outside the lab, nobody keeps track. Suspicious deaths. The sudden and suspicious deaths of 11 of the world's leading microbiologists. Who were they? November 12th, 2001. Benito Q, who is said to have been beaten in a Miami parking lot, died later. Oh yeah, so this is all basically lined out together, one after the other. So the other one was November 16th, 2001. Don C. Wiley, who went missing, was found December 20th by investigators. Said he got dizzy on the Memphis Bridge and fell to his death in a river. November 21st, 2001. This is number 3, is Vladimir Pesinchnik. Number 4 was December 10th, 2001. Robert M. Schwartz was stabbed to death by 3 Satanists have been arrested. Number 5, December 14th, 2001, was Nguyen Van Set, who died in an airlock filled with nitrogen in his lab in Geelong, Australia. Number 6, February 9th, 2002, Viktor Korshunov, who had his head bashed in his home in Moscow. Number 7, February 14th, 2002, Ian Langford, who was partially naked and wedged under a chair in Norwich, England. Number 8 and 9, February 28th, 2002, San Francisco resident Tanya Hosemeyer was killed by her microbiologist colleague, Quayne Wayne, who then shot her when ended up shooting himself. Number 10, March 4th, 2002, David Wynne Williams died in a road accident near his home in Cambridge, England. And 11, March 25th, 2002, Stephen Mostow of the Colorado Health Sciences Center, killed in a plane he was flying near Denver. I'm just going to show the headline of this one here. As SARS bioterror fears grow, prototype isolation and treatment facility to be built in Pittsburgh area beginning mid-August. That was from July 24th to July 24th. This is actually dated, the link is dated July 28th of 2003. So this article is from 2003. Brazil launches inquiry into U.S. population activities that charge millions sterilized. U.S. sponsored. This is from. Okay, this was copywritten in 1991. U.S. sponsored program that resulted in the sterilization of nearly half of Brazil's women has prompted a formal congressional inquiry sponsored by more than 165 legislators from every political party that is represented in the Brazilian legislature. The investigation was initiated after information about a secret U.S. National Security Council memorandum on American population control objectives in developing countries was published in the Jornal de Brasilia do Povo, Rio de Janeiro, Journal do Brasil, and other major newspapers in early May. That U.S. foreign policy document, officially known as National Security Study Memorandum 200 or NSSM 200, detailed a plan to target 13 large developing nations with intensive efforts to promote population policies that would allow the U.S. to run massive birth control and sterilization projects in those countries. Brazil, the study said, was placed on the list of 13 target nations because it clearly dominates the continent, South America, demographically, and its population was projected to equal that of the United States by the turn of the century. This said the report, which was jointly prepared for the National Security Council in 1974 by the Central Intelligence Agency, the Departments of State and Defense, and the Agencies for International Development, suggests a growing power status for Brazil in Latin America and the world scene over the next 25 years. The NSC report listed 12 other nations whose growth could give them increased political influences, which were also to be targeted under the International Population Program. Those are Nigeria, Egypt, Ethiopia, Pakistan, Indonesia, Turkey, Bangladesh, India, Thailand, the Philippines, Mexico, and Colombia. The document, which is over 200 pages in length, was written after a proposed World Population Plan of Action was denounced by large numbers of African and Latin American nations by the Vatican and the entire socialist bloc, with the exception of Romania, during a UN population conference held in Bucharest in 1974. The formerly classified strategy document was approved as an integral part of American foreign policy in 1975 by Brent Scowcroft, who served as then President Gerald Ford's security advisor. He occupies the same office today under George Bush. And that's how old this article is. Reports about the document, as well as about the Brazilian inquiry, have since appeared in every part of Brazil and throughout Central and South America. Brazil's Ministry of Health, which had begun an investigation into the sterilization program even before the American population strategy documents were disclosed, has revealed that 44% of all Brazilian women between the ages of 14 and 55 have been permanently sterilized. The older women apparently had the operation done when the program started nearly 2 decades ago. News reports charge that many of these women underwent the operation without their knowledge or consent. Benedita da Silva of the Workers' Party, who represents residents of impoverished sections of Rio de Janeiro, known as favelas, will head the legislative investigation. According to some reports, as many as 90% of all Brazilian women of African descent have been sterilized. If true, this would nearly eliminate future generations of black people in Latin America's largest nation. Brazil's black population is reported to be second in size only to Nigeria's. At least half of Brazil's 154 million people are believed to be of African ancestry. Sounds like Moffat 21. The sterilization program in Brazil, like those just now beginning in dozens of African nations, started as a relatively small voluntary family planning campaign which publicly stressed spacing children rather than reducing population growth. It quickly and quietly escalated, however, taking advantage of unfavorable economic conditions, themselves largely imposed through the policies of the United States and developed countries to press for limitations in family size. The massive sterilization activities were mainly orchestrated by BEMFAM, the Brazilian affiliate of the London-based International Planned Parenthood Federation, according to news reports. Several private U.S. population contractors operating with funds from the U.S. Agency for International Development are also involved. These include the Pathfinder Fund, the Johns Hopkins University Population Communication Services Project, Family Health International, the John Snow Enterprise Program, the Program for the Introduction and Adaptation of Contraceptive Technology, and Association for Voluntary Surgical Contraceptive. All have current activities both in Brazil and in numerous African nations. Some of the Brazilian programs funded through these groups are subcontractors to BFAM, while other projects are run by the USAID contractors through paid contracts at Brazilian universities, family planning clinic firms, and individuals. So going down a little bit further, aside from advocating a strategy to contain the political influence of large and rapidly growing developing countries, the document stressed the need to maintain orderly pro-U.S. leadership in countries that supply strategic and critical materials needed for normal U.S. military and industrial operations. The NSC report stated that the U.S. will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. That fact gives the U.S. enhanced interest in the political, economic, and social stability of the supplying countries. Whether a lessening of population pressures through reduced birth rates can increase the prospects for such stability, population policy becomes relevant to resource supplies and to the economic interests of the United States. Going on a little further, the document also noted that it's vital that officials avoid giving the impression that industrialized country policy to keep their strength down, because this could create a serious backlash adverse to the cause of population stability. The study also suggests that there are diplomatic initiatives where diplomatic initiatives fail to persuade leaders their populations should be reduced, mandatory programs may be needed, and we should be considering those possibilities now. Specific forms of coercion proposed in the study were limited to food rationing and taking account of family planning performances in foreign assistance payments. They're just sickening and disturbing, really. A little further in the article here. Still, there are several African nations that have not yet produced these formal policy statements. The action of Brazil's legislature is an example of an effective response that comes too late. Already about 25 million Brazilian women have permanently and in many cases unwillingly been deprived of the capacity to bear children. Totally disgusting. We're going a little bit further here, more on population control. World News from February 28th, 2003. Experts calculate that the most deadly epidemic of the history will keep numbers down to 8.9 billion by 2050. The United Nations has revised down its forecast of world population growth because it expects nearly 300 million people to die of AIDS over the next half century, a figure comparable to the population of the United States. 2 years ago, the UN Population Division said that it expected the world population to grow from 6 billion to 9.3 billion by 2050. It is expected to reach 8.9. Now it is now expected to reach 8.9 billion. I think that we're seeing right now that number is going down, and it's going to continue dropping. The forecasters also revised down world growth because people are having fewer babies than expected, with fertility rates declining in much of the developing world. Indian women are now having fewer babies than the American women were in the 1950s. Within half a century, fertility in 3/4 of the developing countries is expected to have fallen below the replacement rate of 2.1 babies per woman. Thuraya Ahmed Obeid, head of the UN Family Planning Association, welcomed the news. International efforts in the field of population have been a success. Today, women and men in large numbers are contributing to slower population growth. And the only other countries to have declining populations will be the 7 in sub-Saharan Africa that are the most ravaged by AIDS. Botswana, where 2 in every 5 adults are HIV positive, and life expectancy is 29 years. Is expected to lose a fifth of its people by 2050, and South Africa's population to fall by 4 million. At present, more than 40 million people in the world are HIV positive, and the report suggests that the virus will spread more slowly after 2010 and as people modify their behavior in response to health education. Pentagon details bio-war testing here. Thursday, October 10th, 2002. Thousands of people in Oahu were exposed to biological material during Cold War era government experiments. Defense officials said yesterday the material was supposed to be harmless, but the government has acknowledged that the people with weakened immune systems could have become sick. Military officials have revealed for the first time that deadly chemical agents, including the nerve gas sarin and VX, were tested on the Big Island, but they insisted that no civilians were exposed. Senator Daniel Akaka, Democrat of Hawaii, who serves on the Senate Armed Forces Committee, said the government should have made the information public much sooner. Today's disclosures raise serious concerns about the possible health consequences for veterans and civilians who may have been put at risk by these tests and the subsequent decontamination procedures. So the advertiser, using documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, first reported in detail that the military conducted open-air biological warfare experiments in Hawaii during the 1960s using live bacteria. The article, published in 1984, outlined the biological experiments and established that state officials and the public were never given details. And I highly recommend finding this article, once again entitled Pentagon Details Bio-War Testing here. Look up Project SHAD. The Desert Test Center in Fort Douglas, Utah conducted biological and chemical experiments in the United States, including Puerto Rico, and in Canada and the United Kingdom in the 1960s and early 1970s. At the time, the government was concerned about a threat from the Soviet Union and wanted to review its own burgeoning weapons program. Project 112, as the review was called, involved experiments at sea and on land with about 5,500 military personnel. Military officials released initial information about the tests to the U.S. Senate in 1977 and publicly released additional details in September of 2001 and in January and May of this year. The sea-based testing, called Project SHAD, or Shipboard Hazard and Defense, was intended to identify U.S. warships' vulnerabilities to attacks with chemical or biological warfare agents, and included the use of the USS Granville S. Hall and Army light tugs and target vessels for aerial dissemination tests. Some tests were conducted just 60 miles off Oahu. The government is attempting to notify veterans involved in the tests. The Department of Veterans Affairs will study whether any veterans have suffered health damage from biological or chemical exposure. According to the government, more than 50 veterans who served at sea have filed medical claims. The initial Virginia notification in May involved 622 veterans identified as participants in Project Shad. At the time, the Virginia in Honolulu the VA in okay, VA Virginia. I'm reading too fast. So the VA in which is Veteran Affairs in Honolulu identified seven service members living in Hawaii who took part. Fred Ballard, a VA spokesman, said none of those veterans has come forward. The VA always says that if any vets felt they were exposed, they should come forward and get a health evaluation, so that still stands. The government documented a dozen tests in and around Hawaii between 1963 and 1969 involving biological and chemical warfare materials. So I'm going to read from that article. There's about 4 more pages to go in that one. I just want to get to the next one, which is Porton Down Secret Experiments. This is from I Spy Mag from October 15th, 2002. Priest claims top secret base injected dying patients with killer viruses. And the police start to investigate gruesome allegations that the military scientists at a top secret Ministry of Defense research facility used old and sick people as guinea pigs in germ warfare experiments. Porton Down is already at the center of another police investigation, Operation Antler, which concerns the duping of servicemen with the deadly sarin and tabun nerve gas, mustard gas, CS and CR riot gas, LSD, and other mind-binding drugs believed to be known as BZ. According to intelligence sources, more than 400 complaints and allegations have been made from surviving servicemen and women, covering a period of time in the 1950s up to 1989. So Catholic priest Monsignor John Barry raised the matter almost 30 years ago with the ministers. He said that it was his belief that unlawful killings were taking place. Indeed, journalists from the Daily Express, who have single-handedly championed the cause of many of the victims, believe that they now have new evidence that experiments which allegedly took place between 1964 and 1966, according to their sources, scientists tested a secret killer virus known more commonly today as a biological warfare agent on dying leukemia patients in an NHS hospital. Dolores McMahon, a microbiologist and a junior member of the team who was not involved in decision making, denied there was anything unethical or irregular about the lengthy experiment with Kayesner forest monkey disease on 33 patients at St. Thomas Hospital, London. She said that ethics had now changed and added, of course you have to remember in those days everyone with leukemia died anyway. So look that up. MOD's Porton Down in Secret Experiments. Another one of Porton Down. Used sarin nerve gas test in 1983. Servicemen were experimented on with sarin, the deadly nerve gas, as late as 1983 at the government's Defense Research Center at Porton Down. Documents seen by the Telegraph Review. Previously, Ministry of Defense has admitted tests involving the nerve agent only during the 50s and 60s. This disclosure is central to a criminal investigation by police, codenamed Operation Antler, into the activities of scientists in Porton Down, Wiltshire. It will form a part of a civil action against the government by 500 ex-servicemen later this year. So just a little bit about some of the people that were tested on here. Ian Folks of 38, who was then a private in the 28th Signal Regiment, said, I specifically asked them what the long-term implications of taking part in the test were because I was not happy about it. Of course, if they had mentioned what happened to Ronald Madison, I would not have taken part. So one former soldier who had underwent a sarin nerve gas test in 1983 alleges the government scientists assured him that there would never have been problems with the nerve agent during previous experiments. He says he was not told that Ronald Madison and airmen died minutes after being tested with sarin in 1953. Just sickening. So read more of that from October 13th, 2002. Porton Down used soldiers for sarin gas tests in 1983. West Nile fears take flight in Brooklyn. Closer to home, West Nile infects woman in the Keys. Marathon case may be sign virus is spreading faster. And this is out close to home here in Ontario. From August 29th, 2001, more West Nile virus cases found in Ontario. Tests ordered on birds. Don't panic, but take precautions against mosquitoes. Fear of new farm plague surge. Foot and mouth experts yesterday warned that Britain could be hit by a new wave of outbreaks unless the disease is eradicated before the winter. This is in the scotsman.co.uk on August 29th, 2001. That was a scare of a foot and mouth. Third case of foot and mouth was confirmed in Northumberland, where the original outbreak began. About 70 cattle have been slaughtered, and other surrounding farms will face culls. I have an article that will follow up on that. World supergerm born in Guildford. The mutant superbug that has killed thousands of hospital patients worldwide originated in Guildford, American scientists. The New York research team has traced the first two people known to have caught the MRSA bug, which is resistant to the standard antibiotics, to a hospital in the Surrey town. They were an eczema patient and a nurse whose names are not known. The infection they developed in 1960 has gone on to cause a global epidemic. Millions of hospital patients have been infected by the Guildford strain of the bug, which can be passed on by the slightest touch. Any wound is target for MRSA. It can create terrible infections that are increasingly difficult to treat. And now for a follow-up to the one about the farm, revealed the needless slaughter of 2 million animals. Top government advisor speaks out. Common sense totally suspended. Ministers alerted to wrong policy in March. So this is June 24th of 2001. Ministers ordered the slaughter of up to 2 million healthy animals despite being told by their leading foot-and-mouth expert that the killing was not needed to control the disease. They went ahead with a call on uninfected farms near outbreaks, even though they were told by a leading scientist at the Institute of Animal Health that the scientific basis for it was all a total suspension of common sense. So you can read up on that one there, and we're seeing it now where farmers are burning up their crops. Look for more uh, animals to be slaughtered. Look for rising food prices coming. They're probably going to start saying that animals are having COVID and passing COVID, so they're going to have to slaughter these animals, and that way it'll create a food shortage. Just a guess. Yes. Oh, kind of like today, Supreme Court allows defendants forced medication. This is from Reuters, posted on InfoWars, but this is from June 16th, 2003. A divided U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Monday that the government may force defendants to take antipsychotic medicine to make them competent to stand trial on serious criminal charges, but only under certain limited circumstances. Nice. Remember this one? Red Cross knew a blood test in 1981. That's when they received a whole bunch of tainted blood from prisons and other places. They didn't do the testing on it, and found that the hemophiliacs that received this ended up infected with hepatitis C. It's just completely ridiculous. Documents unearthed by the Kansas City Star shed new light on why the Canadian and U.S. Red Cross delayed testing. A U.S. expert group had recommended countrywide use of tests in January 1981, yet the testing was not begun until 1986 in the U.S. and not until 1990 in Canada. The Canadian government has paid compensation to hepatitis C victims infected from 1986 to 1990, but has excluded people infected before 1986, saying there was no test available before then. It was noted general strong feeling that until more information is available, no one should test on a routine basis, since all blood centers would then be obligated to test. It's just insane what's going on these days. Birth control hormones, antibiotics, many chemicals found in drinking water. This is from Ottawa. Presence of birth control. It's from September 5th, 2001. Presence of birth control hormones, antibiotics, and other pharmaceuticals in drinking water is leading to more rigorous rules for the approval of food and drugs in Canada. And then lastly, this was from the Tetrahedron Publishing Group, Health Science Communications for the People Around the World, which is run by Dr. Leonard Horowitz, and it's entitled Smallpox Gunmen Deputized to Secure Vaccination Areas Resistance Amounts to FEMA's Involvement in the Public Health Plan. FEMA officials unavailable for comment. It says basically Sandpoint, Idaho Federal Emergency Management Agency officials are directing police chiefs nationwide to search local gun owner records to identify and train civilian deputies to secure smallpox vaccination sites, according to documents forwarded to civil rights groups by the police chiefs engaged in a growing smallpox vaccination resistance movement. The plan calls for armed civilian security guards to maintain the peace in every room the vaccine will be given. The FEMA directive is aimed to prevent violence at smallpox vaccination areas. It also effectively removes law enforcement officials who oppose vaccination. Police chiefs are now being pressured to comply, get vaccinated, and then promote the smallpox vaccine. said one chief who requested anonymity. They expect us to follow the 500,000 military personnel that began to receive the vaccine this week. The general public may be required to take the vaccine immediately following the first reported case of smallpox and after 10 million healthcare workers, the emergency responders are vaccinated and positioned to run the mammoth civilian program. FEMA officials were unavailable for comment regarding their involvement in ordering one armed civilian security staff to defend every two vaccinators, including one preferred registered nurse. These civilian volunteers are expected to administer thousands of vaccines per day. Authorities will claim this availability of lethal force is meant to reduce risk and protect volunteers, said Ingrid Castle, the director of Vaccination Liberation, a nationwide association that has established dozens of local chapters to defend the legal right to abstain from vaccinations. We are seeing increasingly coercive policies, allegedly for public health and national security, that dangerously restrict civil rights and religious freedoms. Where are we seeing that happening? We are seeing it happening right here, right now. Authorities will claim this availability of lethal force is meant to reduce risk and protect volunteers. We are seeing increasingly coercive policies. Clinical trials are on the largely unproven smallpox vaccine are ongoing Baylor University and 3 other sites. That proves the experimental nature of this entire program, said Dr. Leonard Horowitz, a public health authority and bioterrorism expert who helped establish a public information website about smallpox. I don't know if it's still up, but that website was allaboutsmallpox.com. Many medical and public health officials have serious doubts about the expected benefits versus known health risks of this hurried plan. A scientific consensus voted against this plan last summer, Dr. Horowitz explained, referring for a series of governmental hearings that concluded in June, forcing military and emergency personnel to receive a 52-year-old mixture of cow pus, mercury, and fetal calf serum to adequately protect against modern strains of smallpox, including those weaponized for mass destruction, grossly violates common sense and medical ethics. I've been vindicated, said Jack McClam, a retired military and police officer and publisher of Aid and Abet, a police military periodical. Officer McClam has been persecuted for years, openly criticizing the government while predicting law officers would be used to enforce coercive public health policies that attack civil liberties and undermine religious freedoms. My detractors laughed when I said tyranny would not come to the home of any American unless it comes in uniform. Now, no one is laughing anymore. And no one's laughing here.